In the highest of your honor, we're privileged to introduce Robert Nahanee of Squamish Nation, co-founder of the National Aboriginal Veterans Day. First off, we'd like to thank you for joining our listeners today. If you could start off with where you're from.
At this time, my name is Robert Nahanee, and I'm from the Squamish Nation. I live in the village of Otslahan, which some people know as North Vancouver.
With that, could you express your military experience?
Yes, I can. It started very early in my life. In the early '60s, I started Army cadets, and I spent 5 years with Army cadets in North Vancouver at the 15th and Forwards of what they call the 6th Field Squadron Royal Canadian Engineers. And then after I got old enough, they put me in the 6th Field Squadron Reserves, which was an engineer corps. And I spent time there, and then in 1963, I made a choice in my life to join the regular forces. And you know, when they talk about some of the reasons why you join, well, some of the dysfunctions that were in our community made me make a choice that I needed to leave this area and to get out of that environment and that lifestyle that was being created at that time. So I just turned 17 in about that time, 1963, and I joined the regular forces here at 11 PD in Jericho Beach. And then they sent me out to Edmonton, Alberta, to do my boot camp. And after I finished my boot camp, I did my LI leading infantry training, and I did my airborne training there. And then from there, I went to Europe to NATO forces, British Army on the Rhine, and I spent 3 years over there till the early part of 1967. And then I came back to Canada, and I spent a year on disembarkation leave, and then again I re-signed, and I joined the forces again, and I was posted to Edmonton. Okay, at this time, when I joined the Canadian Army in 1963, I was posted to Edmonton, Alberta, and there I was joined a unit, the 2nd Battalion PPCLI, Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry. And I completed my boot camp, and I was posted to the battalion, and I went into a unit called A Company, which was the airborne company. So they sent me down to Rivers, Manitoba, and I did my airborne training, and that was one of the things that my dad didn't want me to do, because his experience, my dad, he had 2 brothers that were in the Canadian Army, one brother in the Canadian Army during the Second World War, and then he had a brother that was in the American Army, the 101st Airborne Regiment in the United States. And that brother, he was killed overseas, and his brother served over in Europe. From what I gather, my uncle, he was a sergeant, and he was posted to Calgary, Curry Barracks, I think he mentioned, and being such a good shot, and all us native guys were good shots. Our hunting experience. He became a small arms instructor, and then he was sent over to England, and over there he was training the troops before they went over for the Normandy invasion. And after he finished that training sessions, he was sent over there in the engineers, and he was with a mine detecting unit. And so he was one of the guys that used the bayonets to find out where the tank mines were. So that was my understanding of who they were. And like I mentioned, I was posted with the 2nd Battalion PPCLI in Edmonton, 1963. And after I got my LI training, leading infantry, and my airborne, I was posted over to Europe into the NATO forces with the British Army on the Rhine. I spent 3 years over there. And I came home, and I had a year off, disembarkation leave. I had this opportunity to think about re-upping and re-signing, so I did that. And I was posted again to Edmonton. And then in 1968, they sent me over to Cyprus with the United Nations Emergency Forces there. And we were in a policing action over there, and at that time. And I spent the 6 months over in Cyprus, came home, and in the meanwhile, when we were coming home, they moved our unit down to Calgary, so we were posted right to Calgary, and that became my home station, and was posted again a second time over to Cyprus in 1970-71, and then I was posting with another unit they called Ace Mobile, and not too many people know this unit. What our responsibility was. They sent us up to Norway on the Russian border, and this was the time that I guess during the Cold War, when Canada was exercising their right to the 200-mile limit. So we spent time up there, and that was my experience overseas. And I came back and I did various duties here in Canada. I was posted up in the Northern Territories in the Arctic Circle. I was posted to Fort Churchill, where we did northern training and navigation, survival, and then they flew us north to Resolute Bay, where we spent some time up in the Arctic Circle, just maintaining our foothold on the north in this manner, that we're Canadians. So that was my experience in the Canadian Armed Forces. And like I say, when I was posted to Edmonton in the early 60s, I left home because of a very good reason. I was on what they call on that road to going to probably most likely prison or to jail. And I didn't want to do that because I was 17 years old and I'd seen a lot of my fellow brothers going off to jail, and I didn't want to see my life wasted in that prison because I was 17 years old. And so I made that choice through my father. My father had to sign the papers. I was so young when I signed up. And I could only imagine what it was like when we went overseas to Cyprus. I was a corporal and I was put in charge of a post that was over there. And I looked at some of the young fellas that was going to be under my command, and they were all in their 70s and up to 20 years old. And I was already in my 20s, and I was the old guy of the unit.
Would you like having experience in the military for Canada? And coming back to, could you express your experience with your colleagues at the military? Were you treated the same as your non-native military friends?
I got along with the troops quite well with the ones that I was active with, but there was always that kind of a dark cloud over our heads. I say our heads because there was a lot of Native men in there from various nations across Canada, and it always seemed that we were always held back in a manner. And I recall there was a time that I was doing this job. I was with heavy weapons in the unit, and I was supposed to get a posting down to Borden in Ontario to do an advanced course, and I was dropped from that course. I was held back because there was other guys that went down there, and the man that they did send down, he failed the course. But I had been doing this job for 5 years already, so I felt that I was held back on that in that manner. And yeah, like I said, there was times that, and there's a lot of personal issues around that. I did run into some discrimination there with other guys, but we worked through it. And like I say, a lot of the Native guys, we stuck together, and we made that comradeship. And like I say, we helped one another and took care of one another in that manner.
When you returned after serving the military, what 1970s, 80s?
I think it was 1971. What happened with that is like when we mentioned about. I gave thought when my uncle mentioned about what happened to them when they went to the Second World War and they came home, and they didn't get the same benefits as the non-natives. They were actually when they were released, they were sent right back to their reserves, and they didn't receive the benefits of education, of grants, to help them along in this new life that we're looking at with today's modern society. And he mentioned that in order for him to get his education, he had to pay for it himself, and he had to do it through the mail, what they call correspondence course. Of course, we all know that at that time, and my understanding of our history as Native people, we weren't allowed to go past the grade 8. And if we got to grade 8 and became 16, we had to get into the workforce. And that's something that I felt that maybe, I don't know if it was my fault if I didn't dig into it, or they didn't give me the opportunity to mention it to me about what my rights were and you know, what the possibilities were. So that was something that I look at today. And you know, we look at where we're at today. We're at the cenotaph here at Cambie and Hastings, Victoria, or Victory Square. And I did look down the road, and I remember this place when I was a young boy. We used to catch the ferry from across North Vancouver and come here, especially around Christmas time, this time of year. You couldn't move for people because the stores and the streets were filled with the people. But now that we've expanded in more population, you know, there's not that many people here. But I remember our people used to come here all the time, and just down the road where this Aboriginal Day started with the march at Carnegie, at Main and Hastings. Right across from Carnegie was where they used to have the office of the Native Brotherhood, which was formed in, I think it was 1930. And at that time it was illegal for us Indian people to speak about politics. It was illegal. We could go to jail for that. Matter of fact, in that time it was illegal for us to wear our regalia as we did on that day of that march. We could go to jail. And I think at that time the law said if there was any more than 3 Indians, it was a riot. So they could arrest us. So I remember my grandfather, because he was a business agent. He was a secretary for that organization, the Native Brotherhood, for some 40 years. I think 45 years he worked for them. And they forced him to retire. I think he was 75 when they told me he had to retire. And he didn't want to, and he was a man of that old time, because he was born somewhere around 1895, just down the road from the cenotaph in Stanley Park. That's where he was born, and that's where his mom was from. And like I say, you know, when we see these things, you know, yeah, we do get upset about it. We do get angry about it because our rights weren't taken care of. And that's what our veterans from the Second World War brought back with them. We need to get back to the land. We need to get back to our rights, because we have that inherent right. Why did we go to those wars, and why did we stand up for this great nation they call Canada, the Dominion? The Dominion of Canada was formed by our people, because our veterans go way back to the, as we mentioned, to the plains of Champlain, when the English and the French were fighting. They were allies, and that's why we've got special rights here. And when Canada became a Dominion, there was proclamations made of 1763 with the royalty, and that guaranteed our inherent right as natives to this land. And then this word that we say, stomach, we are people of this land, and that's what I say. And the message that our elders brought to the royalty in 1906 was, we're still on the land and we're still alive. We're still on the land and we're still alive. Telling them they have responsibilities to protect our right, and that's why we wear that uniform, and that's why we went off to those foreign lands and to protect. And the greatest teaching that we got from our elders was, when the call was there and someone was in need of help, we went to help in the best manner that we could. And that's what our veterans did in the First World War. Andy Natrell, I knew him. He was well into his 90s when he passed away a few years back. I knew him, and we spoke, and he went over to there and he became a sniper. And that's what his responsibility was. He told us we went there because those people needed help. And the same thing that the veterans said when they went over to the Second World. When they went over to Korea, the same thing. And I understand, I went to a gathering down in the United States where the American government finally decided they're going to recognize the Korean veterans after 50 years. After 50 years, they got acknowledged that they were in a combat zone and they were fighting for the rights of the people. So that's something that I look at. And even now, when we talk about our past heroes, right across here at the village of Otsalahan, our great-grandmother told us, and she talked about this song, "Oh no Haas Malay." That's calling on the Creator to help the people because they were in need. And they seen the city of Vancouver burning at the time. So the people got in their canoes and they started paddling across the harbor here, Burrard Inlet, to come and help the people that were caught in the fires. And that's how much love that our people had for the people. That's how much generosity they had. They were willing to put themselves in front and help the people, and that's what they taught our veterans, to go stand in front. And the traditional people today, the praying people today, the warriors, they call them the Canaan, the ones that stand up and protect this way of life, they're willing to do that. They're willing to stand up and said, we have to protect the rights of our people, their way of life, their belief, and that's what we're guaranteed today. Our way of life and our beliefs and the way that we walk. And that's what this represents. This is what the veterans stood up for. And I still continue to hold that belief in those teachings in my heart. And I teach my children who they are. Because that's what my uncle was talking. He said that's what the elders said. The grandfather said that, teach your children. He said even if you know one word, haichka, thank you. Even if you know one word, that's a beginning. Because the next person would come along and say, haichka, siyam the stomach, the sequatal. Thank you, my family. That's 2 words. That's a beginning of reviving and reclaiming and rediscovering our tradition that was removed and given laws saying that we couldn't protect, we couldn't do that. We couldn't practice our spiritual beliefs because of people couldn't understand who we were as people of this land. Stomach, and that's what I say, we're people of this land, we were born here. Our ancestors were here from the beginning of time. And today, we're rediscovering it, reusing it, and then saying this is who we are today. And that was the message from those veterans. That was the message they got. And I remember my uncle saying, get educated. And he didn't mean about going down to university, getting out academics. I know there are people that are doing that. We need that because there is today's modern society that we need. And that's what my grandfather was told by his grandmother. Get educated on that language so we know what they're saying when we go to that table. When we sit down and say we have a right to this land, we have a right to our beliefs, we have a right to our faith, and that's what the royalty had guaranteed that they would protect. That was what the Canadian government said they would do today, is to protect our rights. Not give us rights, protect them. What we talked about with those old CMs, the chiefs they called them, what they talked about negotiated at the table. So that's why we're here as veterans today, to make sure that continues. Ossia.